it's fun. It is the Awesemo MLB Strategy Show, sponsored by Jock Market. And just as a testament to how little I pay attention to my schedule ahead of time, last night, Ab and I did Live Before Lock together. And I said, this is the last baseball show we're doing together in the regular season. And like 10 hours later, we're doing another baseball show together. So, Adam, I'm pretty sure this is the last one that we're doing together this year. So let's make it a good one. How you doing?
Yeah, and if it's not, my show this evening is my last baseball show of the season. So if this one isn't, then the next one is.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what we're going to be doing for the playoffs yet, but for regular season, this is definitely going to be the last one. No doubt about it, unless some really crazy scheduling thing happens where stuff gets switched around. But we've got a big slate today. We've got a lot of games with playoff implications. Your Baltimore Orioles are all of a sudden not in the thick of the playoff race, but they're in the thick of the playoff race because they're disrupting other teams' plans. And that's going to be something that did you see the tweet that the Orioles social media sent out?
Yeah, I was going to ask you if one, you saw that tweet, and two, if you had noticed their profile picture being changed to Robert Andino.
Oh, I didn't, except that is hilarious. And listen, this is what you have to root for at this point of the season. And if the Red Sox don't make the playoffs because they can't beat the Nationals and Orioles in games to close out the season, that's also kind of equally funny. But we've got some baseball games to talk about. Like I said, today's show is sponsored by Jock Market as well. Download the Jock Market app if you guys want to check it out. Make your first deposit using the promo code Awesemo and get up to a $50 bonus on your first deposit. But let's jump into these games. And right off the bat, the Yankees appear pretty set into a playoff spot. Not locked up at this point, but 3 games left, holding a pretty substantial lead in the wild card because the Red Sox have been unable to win games. And it's going to be Nestor Cortes on the mound against the Rays, Shane McClanahan going for Tampa Bay. Here's one thing I'm going to say about Nestor Cortes here is, well, number one, he's pitched extremely well as of late, but I also think there's a chance that he could get a very watered down version of the Tampa Bay Rays lineup, which is something also to really be on the lookout for. As for Nestor Cortes as a tournament option, he's only projected for 2% ownership right now, as the recent results assumed from him have been really strong from a strikeout perspective. And with the potential for the Rays to be playing a watered-down lineup, I like Cortes in tournaments today.
Yeah, I think he's fine in tournaments as long as the ownership stays as low as it is. Right now, we have him with about an 11% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, only about 2% ownership. I don't like the price tag on him at 8,900. I think it's getting to a point where you're starting to sort of run out of runway for his ceiling relative to his price tag. It's just, really tough for him to really outperform that. Typically, you're going to get around 90, 95 pitches from him. And it is, a tough matchup against Tampa potentially. But like you said, you could get a watered down Tampa Bay lineup. And even if you don't, when you look at the ownership and you have 40% going to Lance Lynn, you have 35% going to Ranger Suarez at the same price point. You have 20% right now going to Steven Matz. It's at the very least, you can look to Cortes in your lineups where you have more popular bats and you need to offset some ownership, because even if you don't love that price tag or the matchup, which I don't, it's still a 1-game sample, and he's still a pretty solid pitcher as a starter this year. He has a 25.3% strikeout percentage. So the potential is still there. And even if he projects a little bit worse than other pitchers at his price point, at the very least, you can use him to offset some ownership in your more popular lineups.
In the other side, I don't really see a real need to go to the Tampa Bay Rays here. Once again, I don't really think they have a whole lot to play for at this point. Also, Nestor Cortes has pitched well enough. But where I think things get interesting, for me at least here, is once again the New York Yankees. I've been very high on them as a GPP option as of late because they've been these tough pitching matchups and just picking up no ownership. Yesterday against Robbie Ray, for example, we saw the Yankees being sub 1% owned in terms of projection heading into this slate. And Robbie Ray, in true Robbie Ray fashion, goes out. He still maintains that he doesn't strand any runners in the game. He gives up 4 homers over the course of that game. So there was still upside to be found there. And Shane McClanahan this year has pitched well, except there are some underlying numbers here that suggest that he should have a lower ERA than what it actually is. He's a 4.62 expected ERA compared to a 3.44 ERA. He's been a little bit home run prone this year, 14.4% home run to fly ball rate. By the way, when he pitched in Double-A in 2019, he had 17.6% home run to fly ball rate. Once again, the Yankees less than 1% owned. I think this is a team to get to in tournaments again.
Yeah, I'm with you. One thing to mention, and it's kind of nitpicky, but I think the Yankees are just a team where they're always going to be a little bit more popular than our ownership projections give them credit for. Like, we're going to have them projected for 1%, and you're probably actually going to get like 2 or 3% going to most of them, and then like 5% going to Judge. That's not a huge deal. It's just, the point remains they're going to be low owned, but probably just not going to be quite as low owned just because they are the Yankees and everyone's aware that of the power upside that they have. But the point still stands that whenever they're going to be in that single digit ownership, they're a high upside offense. It's not a particularly good matchup against McClanahan. He's got really good stuff, 3.26 xFIP this year, 1.05 home runs per 9, but you still have tons of power in the Yankees lineup. One thing that I will be paying attention to, and we mentioned it yesterday, what exactly does this lineup look like? We already know Luke Voigt's not going to be in it because he's on the injured list. Joey Gallo missed yesterday's game. Remains to be seen if he'll be in today. DJ LeMahieu left yesterday's game early. He may not be in today. You could potentially just really start getting some watered down Yankees lineups, and not, because they want to, but because they're running out of players. Like yesterday, for example, as you're trying to add on runs with your Yankee stack, you have Tyler Wade batting in front of Anthony Rizzo, not exactly where you wanted to be. If you get this lineup without LeMahieu and without Gallo, certainly guys like Judge and Stanton are still going to look good. Torres, Sanchez are going to be fine, but you start to sort of run out of guys that you really want to roster if they're not in. But assuming you get some semblance of a normal Yankees lineup, I do think that they are in a very similar situation to where they've been the last couple of slates.
Yeah, and then just to follow up, because I had said that I don't have any real interest in the Rays as a stack, but I don't want to just totally project my opinion on you and make it seem like that is your opinion as well. Are the Tampa Bay Rays an offense that you would like to get to today?
I'm pretty much in line with you. The one thing with Tampa, they're another one of these offenses where I'm never, if they're low owned, I'm never upset about getting to them because there is so much power in the lineup. They do also have some reasonable pricing. Rosarena is only 4,300. Margot is only 3,200. If Diaz is in the lineup, he's only 3,900. So it is a stack that you can get to for pretty cheap. Only a 4.1 implied run total. We mentioned Cortez has been pretty solid as a starter. 25% strikeout percentage. He has allowed 1.57 home runs per 9. He does have a 4.56 xFIP. He's stranded 87.6% of base runners. I don't think in terms of run prevention, Nestor Cortez is nearly as good as we've seen so far. He only has a 3.01 ERA as a starter. I still think he's got strikeout potential and all of that, but I do think we see some regression, probably next season as opposed to today. But I view him as a pitcher that is good, but not nearly as good as the results indicate. So I'm never opposed to getting to Tampa Bay, but still on a 13-game or 14-game slate, not a priority, just another high upside offense that isn't going to get much ownership.
All right, now we can talk about the Boston Red Sox, who already, we've got Sean V in the chat. He's already taking umbrage with the Boston Red Sox, who says that every day top stacks bill as Boston is the clear number one top stack, and every day they completely bust. A little bit of recency bias baked in. That certainly was the case the last night, and 2 nights ago they were pretty negatively leveraged and then ended up sucking that day. But the bigger point here, the Boston Red Sox are seemingly had a clear path to playoffs. They had a lead. They had 3 games left against the Orioles, 3 games left against the Nationals, and you just assume, all right, the Red Sox win the majority of these games. They are in the playoffs. Instead, they lose 2 in a row to Baltimore. Now they've got a 3-game series against the Nationals, but they need to win these games. And it's hard to feel totally confident in them overall, just given the last couple of games. But I mean, that aside, this is a spot against the Washington Nationals where the Boston Red Sox, we don't have them today as the number 1 top stack option in terms of overall probability. Those honors go to the Toronto Blue Jays. But Boston is still second. They look about appropriately owned. Nothing crazy in terms of positive or negative leverage. 10.3% odds being a top scoring team, 10.2% ownership share. I think this is a team that as of now to get somewhere around 10% exposure to.
Yeah, I think it's another pretty good spot as well. Josh Rogers, a young pitcher going for the Nats to put into to kind of, when I look at a pitching prospect and try and figure out if they're going to be any good, one thing that clearly gives away that they probably won't be is if they were in the Orioles system over the last couple of years and the Orioles let them go. The Orioles have 0 pitching, as we know. And so if this guy wasn't someone that they felt like they needed to keep in their organization, he's probably not thought particularly highly of. He's 27 years old, doesn't have much major league experience at all. I think that it's another good spot for Boston, 5.3 implied run total. pretty reasonable pricing again. Devers and Bogarts are priced up. Renfro's up to 5K. So they're a little bit more expensive than they were for most of the Baltimore series, but I still think you'll be able to get to them here. A little bit lower ownership than we've seen recently as well, which is nice. So I'm cool with going back to Boston. I didn't really have them at all in the Baltimore series. Would have thought that made me money, but it didn't. But I think, with the ownership being lower here, them not being the highest owned stack tonight, I'm more likely to start getting to them again.
Yeah, and on slate this size, we've got 14 games to choose from. That generally tends to spread the ownership out a little bit, other than the Minnesota Twins, who just every day project for a ridiculous amount of ownership. But outside of them, there is no team that looks like they're crazy under-owned or anything, or over-owned or anything like that. So with that in mind, it certainly looks like a spot with the Boston Red Sox, where despite, relatively sizable ownership for a slate this size, it's nothing egregious. 10% is totally fine with me. It's a team that I want to be getting to. On the other side, Eduardo Rodriguez, a man who throughout the year I've touted as being unlucky, and his luck was going to turn. Well, now it's the last start of the season. The Red Sox need him to pitch well. If there was any time for him to see some positive regression in his luck-based stats, now would be the time against the Washington Nationals. Then I do think this is a spot that makes sense for Eduardo Rodriguez. If you look at his overall numbers for the year, the strikeout rate is a career best mark. The walk rate is a career best mark. He's been done in by a 365 BABIP, a 67.6% left on base rate. But what's really important to me here is that he's on the road in National League Park where he gets to face against the pitcher. And then also it's, a Nationals lineup at this point in the season outside of Juan Soto and Josh Bell. There aren't that many great bats to be afraid of here. So I think Eduardo Rodriguez relative to this slate is somebody to look at. He's a little bit popular, but it's nothing that's really scaring me off him. And I actually think our top pitcher odds on him are a little bit too low.
Yeah, I like getting to Rodriguez here. I'm with you. I just think he's been unlucky pretty much all season long. It's not the best matchup. Washington has one of the lowest strikeout percentages in baseball since the trade deadline. You are getting 20% ownership going to Rodriguez on DraftKings, which isn't great, but a 3.8 implied run total for the Nats. Rodriguez does have a 27.5% strikeout percentage this season, 3.42 xFIP, 1.13 home runs per 9. He's been a little unlucky in home run per fly ball percentage. His left on base percentage is lower than you would expect going forward. So I still think that he's just been unlucky in terms of run prevention. The strikeout stuff has been there. So it's not, again, it's not the best strikeout matchup, or it's not even a good strikeout matchup, but I do just like the talent that Rodriguez offers at 8,500.
Yeah, and one more thing I just want to bring up before we carry on is we have somebody in the chat saying that Franmil Reyes was confirmed in the FanDuel lineup last night and then ended up not playing. Don't pay too much attention to whatever FanDuel and DraftKings have for news. They have all the time. There'll be a pitcher who's starting and they just listed as out on DraftKings. That's something I'll get a lot of messages about where people are like, hey, you said Garrett Cole's starting tonight. He's listed as out on DraftKings. Yeah, it's a bad news source. Don't use the DraftKings or FanDuel app for your news. It's generally going to be behind. But on the other side with the Washington Nationals, any interest in their offense going up against Eduardo Rodriguez?
No. When I view the Nats, it's more so that I think they could kind of ruin Rodriguez's start just because they don't strike out a lot. I don't think it's particularly likely they have a lot of success offensively, and they're not really that cheap either. You still have Escobar priced up to 4,900 for whatever reason. Lane Thomas is reasonable at 4K. You can always roster Soto, but it's an offense that is in a pretty tough spot and isn't really cheap. 3.8 implied run total again, so don't really have much interest in the Nats.
Yeah, it's a big slate, a lot of other spots to get to, and that is not going to be one that's a priority for me. Now, here's where the slate gets a little bit tricky in terms of doing a strategy show in the morning, because there are a few teams that have yet to name a pitcher, and one of them is the Baltimore Orioles going up against the Toronto Blue Jays. As of now, we have the Toronto Blue Jays projected for the highest overall top stack odds on the slate. And even though we don't know who's starting for the Orioles, unless something's been confirmed in the last 15 minutes since we started, I don't know who the pitcher is, but I do know one thing. He's not going to be good. There's nobody the Orioles could go to that's going to be good. Even if it's a bullpen game, the Orioles have a bad bullpen. So I assume this is going to be a good spot for Toronto. But what do you make of the situation?
Yeah, I don't really think there's any way that it's a bad spot for Toronto. The guess on DraftKings right now is Connor Green opening, followed by Tom Eshelman. I don't know what they base those guesses off of. They're wrong constantly. But it's going to either be that or something very similar where you're just getting garbage pitching throughout the game from Baltimore. If Tom Eshelman ends up being the guy that gives you multiple innings, he's a command guy where Occasionally, if you roster hitters against him, you end up being really frustrated because he doesn't throw harder than like the average high school pitcher. But typically, he's just going to get lit up. The guy throws like 85 miles an hour. If he's not hitting his spots perfectly, he's going to get lit up. Even if it's not him, it's just a bad Baltimore bullpen. So on the one hand, bullpen games typically not that appealing. When it's the Orioles, though, I think you can make an exception because just most guys coming in are going to be favorable matchups for the entire game. Toronto, of course, a lineup that has tons of power, doesn't strike out a lot. I absolutely love Toronto here. The ownership is up there, but it's not like it's a crazy amount either. You have enough other good hitting spots on this slate to kind of balance that out. We have Colorado projected right now for 10% ownership. You have Boston at 10%, Minnesota at 17, Toronto at about 12. So as long as those other teams are going to pull some ownership, it's going to keep Toronto at reasonable ownership as well and make them look like a really, really good stack.
Yeah, and the only players right now individually that are over 10% owned is we've got George Springer at 21%, Marcus Semien at 16%. So still in Bo Bichette, 7% projected ownership. Vlad is at 8%. We've got Teoscar Hernandez right at that 10% number. So in general, it's not like this is a crazy amount of ownership. And you could very easily make a stack that leaves out Semien or Springer. And there's plenty of other good hitters to roster on Toronto that would also reduce that ownership share. So I think this is going to be a good spot to get to the Blue Jays. So we do have this positive leverage right now, even despite them picking up double-digit ownership. So it's going to be a spot that makes sense. And then pitching for them, Steven Matz, who I don't really know what to make of Steven Matz. He's never been a pitcher I've been particularly high on. I'm actually a little surprised that we have Steven Matz with such better top pitcher odds than somebody like Eduardo Rodriguez. For me personally, I would just rather be playing Eduardo Rodriguez than Steven Matz, kind of despite what our top pitching odds say. And Matz this year, once again, his numbers are not terrible. 3.88 ERA, 4.05 expected ERA, but 22.3% strikeout rate. I just think in a similar price range, there's more upside in Eduardo Rodriguez pitching in the National League and with a higher K rate.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm surprised that the top stack percentage or top pitcher percentage is so different between the two. Maybe that changes throughout the day, but I just have a hard time when, Rodriguez doesn't have the best strikeout matchup, but the Orioles have a very right-handed heavy lineup that can do some damage as well, particularly 1 through 5. You have Mullins, who's a lefty, but then Mountcastle, Hayes, Mancini, Severino, not easy outs for Matz. The implied run total is basically the same between these two teams. And when you look at just the pitcher and throw out the matchup, Rodriguez 27.5% strikeout percentage, Matz 22.3%. If both pitchers are on top of their game, you're just getting more upside from Eduardo Rodriguez based on what they offer. So it's really surprising to me that that the gap is as big as it is. I don't think it should be. I think maybe that changes as the day goes on. But either way, for me, if they're going to be similarly owned, I prefer Rodriguez just because typically I'm going to side, especially in a case where it's not like Rodriguez is a worse pitcher than Matz that just also happens to get strikeouts. 3.42 xFIP for Rodriguez this year, 3.95 for Matz. Very actually identical walk percentages. Matz 1.06 home runs per 9, Rodriguez 1.13. I think Rodriguez is the better pitcher just in terms of overall, and he's got better strikeout stuff. So if ownership's going to be similar between those two, I'm going to get to Rodriguez first. All of that being said, Matz is still fine here. The Orioles are, even against left-handed pitching, an average-ish offense. Matz this year only a 20.2% strikeout percentage against righties, 321 expected WOBA, 156 expected ISO. I think he's fine. I just think that he should be lower owned than Rodriguez.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. On the other side with the Baltimore Orioles, there's some individual hitters that hit left-handed pitching well, but not necessarily an offense that I'm going to be flocking to. But Pedro Severino is a catching option on DK. Never mind that against a left-handed pitcher. But overall, this is a team right now. We have 1.5% projected ownership to 2% chance to be a top stack. Even if Steven Matz, I'm saying I don't think as good as a pitching option as Eduardo Rodriguez, that doesn't mean all of a sudden that I'm dying to stack up the Orioles.
Yeah, me neither. I do think the pricing's pretty appealing. There's not a ton I want to pay for at pitcher, so that makes it less appealing, I guess. Like if this were a slate that had, I don't know, good pitching at the top. I didn't have a good example off the top of my head ready to go, but the Orioles would be more appealing. I mean, you do have Hayes at 3,600, Mancini at 32, Severino at 31. These are guys that do have some power. Since the start of the 2019 season against left-handed pitching, Mountcastle at 248 expected ISO, Hayes 193, Mancini 258, Severino 205. So there is some cheap power upside there. And then Mullins, of course, just having one of the best seasons in baseball. So I don't mind using them, but it'll probably more so be like two mans, three mans, just using them as some value at relatively low ownership, getting some negative correlation against Mats, and then having a 5-man stack of a better offense.
All right. Next man up. Does Ranger Suarez only pitch against shitty teams? Like, is there ever a spot where Ranger Suarez like, oh look, Ranger Suarez is in a tough matchup today? Because every day I look at Ranger Suarez, like that's a curious amount of ownership for somebody. While he's had good results this year, I don't totally buy into it. But here are the recent matchups that Ranger Suarez has had. Here's why he's always popular. Ever since getting stretched out, because early in the year he was a reliever, then he gets moved into the starting rotation. Ever since getting stretched out, he has pitched home against the Diamondbacks, on the road against the Marlins, home against the Rockies, home against the Cubs, home against the Orioles, home against the Pirates, and now he gets to finish out his season with another start against the Miami Marlins. So at no point does the situation get more difficult for Ranger Suarez, and so that's going to really leave us up to interpretation going into next year in terms of how good he actually is. But at least for today, this is a good spot for him on paper. It's just once again the same issue I have with Ranger Suarez in all these starts. He's projected for too much ownership at this point in time. We've got him projected for 35% ownership on DK at 8,800. On FanDuel, he's projected for over 20% ownership at 9,000. For sure, it's a good match for Ranger Suarez. His results have been good this year. But is this an ownership number that you're willing to get to, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's still going to depend on what offenses you're going to. But the big thing for me with Suarez here that makes him different than Taijuan Walker 2 nights ago, that makes him different than Rich Hill last night. You had Walker at 6,600. There's just not really pivots around him that were remotely close to Taijuan Walker facing the Marlins. Similar situation with Hill. You had Pivetta, but he was also getting ownership at 7K. There's just not a lot of talent in that price range. Here, you still have a great matchup for Suarez, and he's been good as a starter so far. 24% strikeout percentage, 3.46 xFIP. The big difference, though, is that he's $8,800. So not only is there just less margin for error because he's more expensive, but there's more pitching talent in that price range to pivot to potentially. As opposed to just being at a really cheap price where there's not really talented arms around him. Just ignoring matchups and just thinking about the number of decent to good pitchers priced around Suarez. You have Mats, you have Inoa, you have Cortez, you have Rodriguez, you have Tyler McGill, you have don't even really want to mention Marco Gonzalez, but you have Marco Gonzalez. So the point just being that if you think of it like Suarez versus the field, where the field is pitchers in his price range, the field is just way bigger for Suarez against the Marlins tonight than it was for Hill last night or Walker the night before. So that's one thing that makes me think where I was way over the field on Hill last night. I had like 83%. I was over the field on Walker with like 41% 2 nights ago. I think it's more likely that I'm under the field on Suarez than that I was going to be under the field on those guys, just because there's way more guys in this price range that I can use instead of Suarez.
Yeah, and I think that all makes sense. I wish that we got to see Ranger Suarez in a difficult matchup at some point this year. I don't understand why. I mean, it's obviously just schedule up, but it's funny how ever since he got moved in the rotation, kind of like, all right, let's see what happens when he finally gets stretched out. And then you look at, like Baseball Reference, where their wins above replacements, that just kind of takes into account results and doesn't really take opponents into account for. So they have Ranger Suarez as a top 10 pitcher in baseball. And it's like, all right, that doesn't really sit well with me, but we're never going to see the other side where he's going to face a tough matchup. And on the other side, there's been times where I've stacked against Ranger Suarez, like when he pitched against the Cubs because he was really popular. But on a slate this size, I don't really know that I want to get that kind of leverage with the Marlins.
Yeah, same here. Just a big enough slate. I'm not really looking to get to the Marlins. And again, I don't think Suarez is bad. I'm viewing it more as like, because of all of the options in his price range, if you get like 18 points or something from Suarez, there's still a decent chance he ends up not being the top pitcher out of that group. So it's not even like you necessarily need the Marlins to have a really good game or anything. It's just that Suarez can pitch reasonably well and still lose out. So I don't really see much reason to get to Miami either. Brinson at 2,200 I think is fine, but nothing that really stands out.
And then on the other side, Sandy Alcantara is going to be pitching against the Phillies. One thing to keep in mind here with Alcantara is now the Phillies have been, I'm pretty sure, they were officially eliminated from the playoffs yesterday. And I'm not sure that they're going to be going out and being like, hey, we're going to play Bryce Harper or Andrew McCutchen. I don't know that all of their starters are going to be out there like normally would. So I think Alcantara is a little bit overpriced at 10,200, but he becomes a really appealing option should the Phillies go out and just play a bunch of backups or a B lineup today.
Yeah, and he's low-key having a really good year. He's had a couple of starts where he got blown up, but like in most of his starts, he's been really good. He's also been very, very good at home, which isn't really surprising given that He pitches in Miami. He has a 26.6% strikeout percentage at home this year, 2.95 xFIP. I do really want to see the Philadelphia lineup, though, because while it's not particularly dangerous, even if it's their normal one, it's a really, really tough lineup to strike out. Herrera doesn't strike out. Segura doesn't strike out. Real Muto is not a high strikeout guy. Gregorius doesn't strike out. If Torreyes is in there, he doesn't strike out. So it can be tough. We kind of saw it with Andy Henderson last night. He had a decent start. I think he ended up giving up like 2 earned runs, but only struck out a couple of guys. It's just a team that puts the ball in play. So I would definitely like Alcantara more if Philadelphia runs out some lineup that has, backups that strike out. But if we assume it's some semblance of their normal lineup, I think Alcantara is okay in tournaments because he's only getting 6% ownership, and I do think he's good. And there's plenty of cheap hitting on the slate that you can use to offset his salary. But I wouldn't be going crazy on him just because I do think it's a very difficult matchup to get strikeouts.
Yeah, and then once again, a lot of my of Sandy Alcantara is going to be dependent on what that Phillies lineup looks like. And I don't think baseball DFS is for people are pivoting based on news as much as we are for other sports. Obviously in basketball, player gets scratched. Everybody looks at the value plays, and we just don't get those situations very often in baseball. But one time we do is this final week of the season where it's all of a sudden teams like, hey, you know what? We don't have anything to play for. We're playing all the backups today because we're either in the playoffs, we're out of the playoffs, and teams want to rest players or teams want to get a chance to look at young players. So this is one of the rare spots for betting purposes and for DFS to maybe take advantage of some of those spots where teams are playing a lot of backups and find some value. So it's hard to know exactly what the lineups are going to look like at this point in day, but Alcantara is somebody who I've highlighted as potentially somebody an easy matchup. And we also have the MLB Deeper Dive, MLB Live Before Lock later. So all stuff will have more information on the lineup. So do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel will have a little more information as the day rolls along. Next game here to talk about it is the Atlanta Braves at home against the New York Mets. Yuscar Ynoa on the mound for Atlanta, Tyler McGill for the Mets. And these are two pitchers who overall I think have had pretty solid seasons, and I like their strikeout upside. Both of them I think going a little bit under-owned. Tyler McGill only projected for 1% ownership. Yuscar Ynoa projected for 9.5% ownership. Those are both numbers I'm looking to get overweight to today.
Same here. Ynoa has struggled a bit lately, but the Mets offense has struggled pretty much all season long. So, battle of two juggernauts there. But we know that when Ynoa's on, the strikeout stuff is good. 27.2% strikeout percentage, 3.38 xFIP this year. So it's a spot where, I'm not super confident that he does well, but you have a 3.9 implied run total for the Mets. That's, Rodriguez facing the Nats. The Nats have a 3.8 implied run total. The O's are at 3.6. Those pitchers both getting 20% ownership right now. Ynoa getting 9%. So I just think it's a situation where he's going a little bit under-owned relative to the options around him. Even Miami has a 3.5 implied run total. So I think Ynoa looks good. And then McGill on the other side, it's a dangerous matchup against Atlanta for sure, but they do have a lot of right-handed hitters in this lineup. And McGill has been lights out against righties this year, 28% strikeout percentage, 126 expected ISO, 257 expected WOBA. He's had some pretty big issues against lefties, 361 expected WOBA, 274 expected ISO, strikeout percentage about 5 points lower than it is against righties. So I think Freeman and Albies are pretty likely to have success here. Rosario is a reasonable option too. But just thinking of it in terms of McGill's ceiling, the Braves projected lineup has 6 right-handed hitters, including Ynoa. And there are some strikeouts here. Soler, Riley, Duvall, Swanson, these guys all strike out. So, and then, the pitcher spot. So I do think that there's a pretty high ceiling for McGill, even if there's also a low floor.
And one other thing, the Braves clinched the division last night. And so it's one of those things where if you look on social media, there's just a bunch of posts of that, hey, look, here's our champagne showers. Here's all of our players drunk. I doubt that we see Freddie Freeman play. I doubt that we see Ozzie Albies or any of these guys or any of those guys play. So of spots where I've said that I think we could see players rest guys, I would be very, very surprised if the Atlanta Braves are going out and they're playing most of their starters today. And actually, I'm going to look at what the sportsbook odds are on this game right now.
Yeah, I mean, so the Braves spot tonight is the same as the Cardinals spot the night that they had Matt Carpenter hitting cleanup.
So the Mets are plus 140 on the first sportsbook I looked at. I'm going to end up betting the Mets today. I'm going to bet the under on the just in case if anybody wants to tail a bet. I'm going to be betting the under the team total is, wherever I can find the best line of that for the Braves, and the Mets plus 140 money line, because that's a number that I think is certainly going to move later in the day once that Braves lineup comes out. It's going to be a weekend lineup, which I'm not saying with 100% confidence, but like 90% sure we're going to see regular starters rested for the Braves, because something we see fairly common after a team clinches the division and is out partying the night before. But any of the offenses here really stand out to you? For me, it's just the pitchers.
Yeah, it's just the pitching. The pricing on the Mets, I think, is still really cheap for the amount of power that they have. So I guess I don't mind that in tournaments if they're low owned. They came through last night with 12 runs. I needed them 2 nights ago. That kind of pissed me off. But you still have Conforto at 2,900, Nimmo at 33, Alonso's 4K, Baez 4,100. While these guys are certainly flawed and mostly not having very good years, that's still a lot of power at really cheap prices against a pitcher who has kind of struggled recently. So right now we have the Mets getting 5.5% aggregate ownership. If that goes down a little bit, I start to become a little bit more interested in New York.
All right. Next game here. This is the games that we kind of get left with at the end of the year sometimes. The Rangers against the Indians, and it is Spencer Howard on the mound against Eli Morgan. So two not so great pitching options, two offenses, teams that have basically been out of the playoff picture for a very long period of time. Now, the Indians offense is certainly a little bit better than the Texas Rangers, and a little bit appealing to me just because they're going up against Spencer Howard and only projected for 3.2% ownership. So on the whole, if there's one takeaway I have from here is that the Indians going up against a bad pitcher, that's something that, as long as we get, a semblance of a full lineup, is something that's going to be appealing to me, because Spencer Howard, bringing up his numbers for the year, they have not been good. It would be helpful if Fangraphs didn't automatically just send me over to Ryan Howard's page, because if Ryan Howard was pitching today, I don't even know if he'd be that much worse than Spencer Howard, given some of his results this year. But 7.04 ERA for Spencer Howard this year, 4.44 expected ERA. He's giving up a lot of hard contact, so it's not really that surprising to me that his ERA would be a little bit higher than his peripheral numbers. Spencer Howard's a pitcher that I certainly think makes sense to pick on. The Rangers don't have a good bullpen behind him, so Indians offense, I think, is going a little bit overlooked today. Yeah,
same here. Howard not likely to go deep into the game, typically throwing like 50 to 65 pitches, or 55 to 65 pitches, I guess. So giving you 3-4 innings, but 4.7 implied run total for Cleveland. Reasonable pricing. The top of the order is pretty expensive, but then it drops off. You have Bobby Bradley at 3,600. Everyone else 6 through 9 in the Indians projected lineup is 3K or less on DraftKings. So it's another team where, you get some power upside with guys like Ramirez, Reyes. Rosario is a decent shortstop option. And then you get value from Bobby Bradley, Harold Ramirez, Bradley Zimmer, kind of whatever you want to do with those guys. So I think it's a pretty good spot for Cleveland. I'm with you. I think they just are going a little bit under-owned here.
Yeah, and it's not massive top stack odds, but once again, it's 5.4%, which is fairly decent for a slate this size compared to 3.2% ownership share. So that's something that makes sense to me. Pitchers, certainly not anything I think either of us are going to be interested in here. And then the Texas Rangers on the other side, kind of odd to me. They're picking up more ownership than Cleveland, 4.1% projected ownership share, a weaker offense, and also what I think is a worse spot. So I don't really like the Rangers. Do you feel any differently about the pitchers on either side, or Texas is?
I don't really like Texas. I do think Willie Calhoun deserves a mention if he's leading off at 2,300. Nathaniel Lowe at 4,500, certainly fine. Morgan's a really weird pitcher in that I don't expect him to be very good in the major leagues. He throws like 90 miles an hour, averaging 90.4 miles an hour on his fastball, give or take. But he does have a good changeup that can get swings and misses. When he's locating, he's actually shown the ability to get some strikeouts. So I don't feel confident in him, but he does, as a starter this year with the Indians, he does have a 22.2% strikeout percentage. His 4.88 xFIP is not good, 1.94 home runs per 9. But we know that this is a Texas team that does have strikeouts, and it's just one of the worst offenses in baseball. If Eli Morgan at 7,300 is only going to be projected for 2 to 3% ownership on DraftKings, I do actually have interest in him in tournaments, even though I hate him as a pitcher.
We do have him projected with a 10.7% chance to be a top 2 value pitcher on the slate. So yeah, maybe it's not really a totally crazy take. As of now, in the initial build I did not get to Eli Morgan, but who knows, maybe that changes throughout the day. And one other thing I'll also mention in terms of free content today, the top pitchers tool is free to use over at Awesemo.com. So you can check out those odds there. We right now have Eli Morgan projected for 2.8% ownership, 10.7% chance to be one of the top 2 value pitchers on DraftKings, 7.4% of overall being one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate. So at least in that sense, it does make it look like Eli Morgan maybe going a little bit under-owned. But a pitcher is not going under-owned is in this next game. Lance Lynn at home against the Detroit Tigers. And on paper, this is clearly a really good spot for Lance Lynn. The thing I struggle with, though, is what kind of length do you think we could expect out of him today, Adam?
I think that's a really tough question because he threw 105 pitches his last time out, which was more or less a similar situation. I mean, it was, September 25th, so like 5-6 days ago, whatever that is. We've seen the White Sox be somewhat cautious with their pitching, but we also saw Lynn throw 105 pitches last time out. So I kind of view it as a situation where I wouldn't be surprised if he gives you another 6 innings. I wouldn't be shocked if we get the Brandon Woodruff treatment and he gets pulled after 4 innings at 60 pitches either. So I think that it could kind of go either way, but the fact that he did throw 105 pitches last time out makes me more interested in him than I would be if, I kind of, when I first pulled up his recent starts, I sort of expected to just see, 70, 75, 80, 80, 80, like in recent starts. The fact he threw 105 does make me at least a little bit more interested. It is a relatively cheap price tag for a pitcher as good as Lynn that's facing the Tigers. He has a 27.5% strikeout percentage this year, 3.78 xFIP. Probably a little bit over-owned still at 40%, but definitely more willing to roster him than I was, say, Carlos Rodon the other night when I was extremely confident that he was not going deep into that game.
Yeah, if we have to apply a little bit of a narrative to this, is that AL Cy Young pitcher, Garrett Cole's stuck down the stretch of the season. Robbie Ray, he was terrible last night. I know sportsbooks have the odds set now as Robbie Ray like -500, -600 to win Cy Young. I don't totally buy that's the case. Not to say that I don't think he should be the favorite, but I think the odds are a little bit just too short for him. I do wonder if there's some sort of narrative where Lance Lynn's like, hey, I want to try to pitch for the Cy Young. And that's one of the reasons they've extended his pitch count. But once again, I'm just kind of grasping at straws here to throw a narrative out there because it is really odd to me to find any other reason that you would go from being a guy who's throwing like 80 pitches or back to over 100 last start.
Well, the other thing that I can kind of think of, and it would be a narrative in the opposite direction where, again, I'm just grasping at straws too, but he had missed time. So he started August 28th, then he didn't start again until September 12th. He threw 70 pitches in the September 12th start. He threw 83 on the 18th. He threw 105 on the 25th. What if the White Sox were just saying, okay, we want to get you back up over 100 pitches, get you ready for the playoffs. And then today they're going to be like, okay, cool, 60 pitches, get the hell out. So like you can build narratives both ways too. It basically just comes back to like, I have no confidence how deep Lance Lynn goes into this game. I think the range of pitches is literally from like 60 to 100. So that makes me think he is over-owned at 40%, but it's also not someone that I'm just completely writing off like I did with Rodon, because I do think that 100 is still at least in the range of outcomes, where Rodon, it was just like, that is not happening.
Yeah, and I would like to say maybe we get more news from beat reporters, but that's wishful thinking. Beat reporting is generally terrible for baseball. Like basketball is at least they're kind of trying. The information isn't always accurate. Sometimes it comes out late, but baseball, we generally get no kind of information. So we're ultimately going to be guessing. Maybe we get some news later, but I kind of highly doubt it. As for the White Sox offense on the other side, it's going to be a good spot for them, but I'm not sure we're going to see a full version of their lineup. And 7.8% projected ownership, and we have them the 5.1% chance to be a top stack. There's just other teams with similar top stack odds to them that have much lower ownership. So that's going to make the White Sox not very much of a priority play for me.
Yeah, same here. The ownership for the White Sox is about where it should be. They're always, a pretty high upside offense to get to. I don't think Willie Peralta is a particularly good pitcher. They're priced up at the top, but the bottom of the order is cheap. I think Moncada at $4K, Jimenez at 4,200 are both really, really good values. You have Vaughn and Sheets that are cheap, probably hitting 7-8, but the ownership coming in about where it should on the White Sox. So not a real strong take one way or the other.
All right. And the next game that we have here, it is the Minnesota Twins against the Kansas City Royals, and two pitching options that are not going to be super appealing to me, at least in John Heasley and John Gant. But let's talk about all this ownership going to the Minnesota Twins, who have been just crazy popular on so many slates this year where I don't really think it's warranted. And sure, the spot against Heasley appears to be good, but I don't think it warrants 18% ownership. And you consider some of the other ownership we have on the slate. And I guess the price point is clearly good for some of these Minnesota Twins hitters, but I don't want to roster the Minnesota Twins as an aggregate 18% ownership when they have a 5.9% chance to be a top stack. And we have the Boston Red Sox 10.3% chance to be a top stack at 10% ownership. The Toronto Blue Jays 12% odds of being a top stack at 11.7% ownership. So how are you going to be handling a massively chalky Minnesota Twins team?
Yeah, and the thing that sucks about Minnesota's ownership too is I mean, to some extent, it's being driven up by Byron Buxton being projected for 30%. But you still have Donaldson at 20%, Araya is almost 20%, Jeffers at 17, Sano at 16, Polanco at 14, Kepler at 12. Like when you think about putting 5 of these guys in a lineup, half of your lineup is just going to guys that are projected, 10 to 30% ownership. You can make that work, but you're going to have to get pretty off the board with the rest of your lineup. Typically, just end up with less ownership in the field on these guys individually. And 2, it's more so like 2-mans and 3-mans. A lot of my Minnesota exposure last night, like I was close to the field on Buxton last night at like 17%, but going through the lineups where I had Buxton, it was a lot of, Yankee stacks or Blue Jay stacks or whatever low owned stacks that had, maybe a Buxton Donaldson 2-man or Buxton Rooker 2-man, something like that. That's typically how I approach this because the pricing is still really good. And that's why the ownership is as high as it is. We have Minnesota with a 7.5% chance of being the top value stack tonight. That is looks like 4th highest on the slate on DraftKings. So that's why you're getting ownership there because they're in a good spot against Easley. They have a lot of power, but then you also have a really cheap Arias. Buxton is underpriced at 4,700. Same goes for Polanco. Same goes for Donaldson. Kepler and Sano are just flat out cheap at 3,700 and 3,600. So they are going to give you some really highly projected lineups if you use them. So I still like getting to them as, one-offs, mini stacks, but I probably will be doing that a lot more than I'll be going to full 5-man.
And then even on the other side of the game, Kansas City Royals, but these have probably been the 2 most over-owned offenses in the second half of the season, other than that that weird stretch where the Tigers were chalk every day for like 3 weeks because they were hitting well. Other than that, the Kansas City Royals and the Minnesota Twins have generally just been crazy owned in the second half of the season. And Kansas City today are not picking up that much ownership, but still rate out as negatively leveraged in our top stacks tool. Salvador Perez, if you have the money to pay up for a catcher, I never have an issue getting to Salvador Perez. Just broke the record for home runs in the season for a catcher. Alberto Mondesi is a one-off since he's only 1% owned. Okay, that's fine. But on the whole, the Royals are not a massively appealing team to stack.
Yeah, they're projected to go a little bit over-owned, but at the same time, the highest owned guy is Merrifield at 6%. Perez is at 4%. It's still a really, really low owned team. So I don't mind getting there. The upside I think is their Gant isn't a particularly good pitcher. They don't have a ton of power, but they do have speed in their lineup. So you get stolen base upside. Perez obviously has a ton of power. I like Benintendi at 4K. So I'm fine with the Royals ownership. They're still not a team that I love getting to just because I don't think their offense is that good, but I also don't think John Gant's that good. They have a 4.8 implied run total. So I like Kansas City, not a top stack for me, not a team I would be likely to play in single entry or 3 max, but a team that I fully expect to have a decent amount of in 150 max.
Yeah, I don't, like I said, I'm more interested in the one-offs. Like Salvador Perez, I think certainly whenever he's low owned is always going to be a catcher I like as a one-off, which I mentioned that a second ago. But that's the one here that I have the one hitter from Kansas City I have the most amount of interest in, the one that pops up most meaningfully in my initial builds. And then we'll see going forward what else ends up popping up on the slate. But moving on here, we have the Houston Astros at home against the Oakland A's, and a game that Oakland basically out of the playoff picture now at this point. The Houston Astros, their playoff spot is pretty secured. So the starting pitchers in this spot, Framber Valdez and Sean Manaea. Valdez, I find him a little hard to want to roster overall just because I don't know how deep he's going to go into the game. He has a lack of strikeout upside, and he's super expensive at $10,100. There's almost no ownership going to Valdez, but is there enough concerns here and enough of a lack of upside that you wouldn't like him even at 1% ownership?
I'd rather go to Alcantara. I think that Alcantara just has that, I think, a higher ceiling. Like Valdez doesn't have the same strikeout stuff that Alcantara does. It's a tough strikeout matchup for both, but it's a much more difficult lineup just in terms of production for Valdez as well. He is a very good real life pitcher. He has an elite ground ball percentage. But from a DFS standpoint, he typically is going to be more expensive than you want to pay for because he gets priced up for his run prevention skills, even though he doesn't strike out a lot of guys. So if I'm sort of paying up to be contrarian at pitcher, I would rather take Alcantara's ceiling than Valdez's.
Yeah, I'm totally on board that also because Alcantara I think is better. I think he has a good chance of going up against a weaker lineup. And then also I just don't know for Framber Valdez if there's any real need for him to pitch deep into this game, considering the Houston Astros playoff spot is secured and Framber Valdez is likely to play a big role in that playoff rotation. So I don't want to get to him, but I'm not really looking to get to the Oakland offense either. But Sean Manaea on the other side going up against the Houston Astros offense, generally a difficult matchup, and Sean Manaea projected for very low ownership. If I had to play one of the low-owned pitchers on this spot, I'd get to Sean Manaea before Framber Valdez. But even with that said, I'm not sure that is what is going to be. I'm not sure that's going to be enough to get me to Sean Manaea.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. I think, when we're like, when I was talking about Suarez and I was kind of just rattling off all of the pitchers that have talent at that price point, Manaea goes in there as well. It's a brutal matchup. I'm not really looking to get to Manaea, but it just reinforces the point that like the field around Suarez has a lot of talent. Manaea, I think, is one of those guys where he's going to get less ownership than he deserves if you're just looking at his chances of success. I also think there's probably a lot of other spots when you build lineups where it's like, okay, this is a more profitable move than going to Manaea. So I doubt that I get to much, but he's certainly a guy where if you're playing, a 5-man twin stack or Twins, Red Sox or something like that, teams that are getting ownership, Manaea still gives you a ceiling, even though it's a brutal matchup against Houston. Not a lot of strikeouts in the lineup, a lot of right-handed power against righties this year, a 23.7% strikeout percentage, against lefties 32.9%. So pretty big gap there in strikeout numbers for Manaea. Not somebody I expect to really get to, but someone that I do think is pretty talented for a $9,100 price tag.
And offenses in this game fairly low owned on both sides. Anything you think you're going to be looking to stack though?
I guess obligatory Houston has a lot of power. I don't like the matchup, obviously, but they do have a lot of right-handed power. They're projected for virtually no ownership. So wouldn't surprise me if I get to Houston and lose money for the 150th time this year.
Hey, more than 150 times. We're almost at the end of a 162 game season. We're approaching, this would be the 160th time that we get to go down this road together. And by the way, a great time to also mention that you guys can get access to all of the great Awesemo Plus tools and content for nearly every DFS sport out there with an Awesemo weekly pass for $29.95 that gets you access to basically every sport we have. And, baseball season almost done here. We're winding down. If you guys are interested in dipping your toes in the water of all the other sports that are out there, we've got content for just about everything on the site. And if you are new to Awesemo Plus, you can use the promo code MLB Strategy Show. That's all one word, all capital letters, MLB Strategy Show. And that'll get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. We also have an MLB weekly pass for $4.95, but only a few days left in the baseball season. So not a whole lot of utility in that at this point, but that MLB, the Awesemo Plus weekly pass, that gets you access to every sport for $29.95, and that promo code MLB Strategy Show for 25% off. Next game that we have here, it is the St. Louis Cardinals at home against the Chicago Cubs. And at least when we had started the show, there was no listed starting pitcher for the Cubs. And I'm checking to see if anything has changed on that front since then. And I am still not seeing anybody. But one thing that kind of is interesting here about the Cubs from a stacking perspective is even though we have them very low odds to be a top stack of the day, going up against Dakota Hudson with cheap price points, we have a 27.7% chance to be the top value stack of the day. So what do you make of that information?
I think it's pretty interesting because the Cubs also, since the trade deadline, they strike out constantly, but they really haven't been bad in terms of production. They've been around the league average offense. They do have power in this lineup, and they are insanely cheap against a pitcher in Hudson who I forgot even exists. He had been someone that, at one point was pretty hyped up, but going back to the start of the 2019 season against left-handed hitters, a 180 expected ISO, only a 17.5% strikeout percentage, 19.5% strikeout percentage against righties with a 130 expected ISO. I'm always intrigued by offenses like the Cubs that do have some power when they're facing pitchers like Hudson that don't miss a lot of bats because they're more likely to put the ball in play and can do some damage. So Ortega at 2,900, Happ at 3K. Both of those guys from the left side are going to look pretty good. Schwindel, Contreras, Hudson, like I said, has been better against righties, but we know both of these guys have some power. So I do think the value aspect of the Cubs looks pretty good. They're not projected for much ownership either. So I think that they're a team that, we talked about Minnesota getting a lot of ownership because they're cheap. Minnesota is also the more dangerous offense of the two. Like, if ownership were the same, I would rather be rostering guys like Max Kepler than Rafael Ortega. But you're going to get really high upside lineups by using the Cubs pricing, and you're going to get lower ownership than you are on a team like the Twins. So if the ownership holds how it is, I am interested in going to the cheap bats, especially like 1 through 4 on the Cubs.
Most expensive hitter in the lineup is Wilson Contreras at 3,500. And Wilson Contreras is a legitimately good hitter. He's one of the best hitting catchers in baseball. So that alone, that's a kind of crazy cheap price tag. And then just everybody else in this lineup, you get Ortega leading off at 2,900, Matt Duffy 2,100, Nick Martini, Sergio Alcantara, Alfonso Rios. Like a lot of these guys aren't good hitters, but they're all min price. They're the flat 2,000 min on DK. So you could make a 5-man Cub stack or even just use some of these guys with one-offs and use whatever pitchers or other players you like. So that's what's going to be really appealing to me about them. On the other side of the game, I just don't know what to make of the Cardinals when we don't have a starting pitcher for the Cubs, and we don't know if the Cardinals are really going to need to play all their starters today.
Yeah, and the one other thing that makes me think that I probably get to a little bit less Cubs on this slate than I typically would is just that what exactly am I using all that salary for? Like the most expensive pitcher that I'm like actually interested in, kind of excluding Alcantara, is Lance Lynn at 9,500. There's just not a whole lot of pitching that I want to pay up for. So they're going to be a little bit less useful. But if you need value, I think they're fine. On the other side, DraftKings has Adbert Alzolay as the probable starter. Again, I don't see any blurb or anything that suggests that's the case. They might just be guessing. But yeah, really tough to talk about the Cardinals right now without knowing who it is. If it is Alzolay, he's been lights out against righties this year and really had issues with lefties. I think Dylan Carlson would look really good at 3,100. Edman would be fine, but Carlson would be the guy that really, really stands out to me if it is Alzolay.
All right. Yeah. And once again, we're gonna need more information there. We'll have more as the day goes on. Adam's gonna be on Deeper Dive. I'm gonna be on Live Before Lock. You guys like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and when we get more information, we'll have that on the channel later in the day. And this is going to be a more news-driven baseball slate than we normally see, because I think there's going to be a lot of teams playing really weak lineups. But I mean, the Cubs are going to be playing a weak lineup no matter what. That's why everybody's cheap there. Except in general, there's going to be a lot of good teams that are resting players that normally wouldn't. So there's going to be ways to find value if there normally isn't for baseball. Next game here, and here's something I find a little bit curious. There is not a massive high total in this Diamondbacks Rockies game, only 8.5, but still, if you look at our top stacks, so we have really high odds of the Colorado Rockies to be one of the top scoring teams this slate. And there's a ton of ownership going to Colorado that I don't quite understand. I don't think Humberto Castellanos is a good pitcher, but the Rockies on the road are a bad offense. The Rockies against right-handed pitching are also a bad offense. I just don't think they warrant 10.1% ownership. Is there something I'm missing here?
When I saw the top stack odds and the ownership, I fully thought this game was going to be in Coors Field. I don't really get it. I don't think Castellanos is particularly good, but like you said, the Rockies are just absolute garbage outside of Coors Field. And it's not like that's like a random thing, it's explainable because they are used to hitting baseballs that don't move and then they go somewhere else where they do. So that's an issue. The pricing is fine. Story is still relatively inexpensive. CJ Chrome's 3,800, Tapia 3,700. The pricing is okay, but even the implied run total, 4.7 implied run total here, that's similar to so many other teams, the Astros, the Cardinals, less than the White Sox, the same as, or about the same as the Royals and the Twins and the Indians and the Braves. Like they just don't stand out to me whatsoever. So if they are going to get ownership, I just fully expect to be elsewhere.
Yeah, it's just a really curious spot. And I can't go to Castellanos for leverage either because he sucks so much and he's terrible. And I don't think he's going to work particularly deep into the game. So that's not an option for me, but it's a spot where I think overall just too much ownership going to the Colorado Rockies. As much as we've had everybody kind of poo-pooing the recent results of the Boston Red Sox in the YouTube chat today, I don't see any way that the Boston Red Sox should warrant the same exact amount of ownership on the Colorado Rockies on any slate where the Rockies aren't playing Coors Field. And that's basically what we have here. We've got the Rockies 10.1% projected ownership as a team, 10.2% for the Red Sox, 11.7% for the Blue Jays. So give me those two teams, the Blue Jays and the Red Sox, over the Rockies at similar ownership. But on the other side, John.
I do think there's a pretty good chance this just changes by the time like the Deeper Dive show rolls around.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Although with that said, there's been weird slates where we've just seen the Rockies be popular. Yeah. And I think actually off the top of my head, most of them have come in Arizona against bad Arizona pitching. So maybe not the case, but as it stands right now, these numbers do not make the Rockies look appealing to me whatsoever. On the other side of the game with the Arizona Diamondbacks, only a 1.2% chance to be a top stack, but also maybe we have something. Let me look at our betting model to see what we have for this game, because we have the Diamondbacks also project for 4.3% ownership with 1.1% chance to be a top stack. Why I don't understand why the Diamondbacks are picking up this much ownership against the Rockies either.
Cole Calhoun's 2,500, Pavin Smith is 3,100, Rojas is 36. The Diamondbacks have just weirdly been getting ownership lately because of how cheap they are. So that could be it.
Yeah, potentially. I'm looking at like John Gray, I think is a solid enough starting pitcher. And
Yeah, I
I'm
mean, we
going
have
to,
right now we have Cole Calhoun at 11%. We have Rojas at 10. We have Varsho at 6, and every other hitter 1.5 or less.
yeah, I'm looking to, I was checking our MLB betting tool just to see if maybe we had it projected to be a game that like went way over the total or something along those lines. We don't have it updated yet for today's games with being this early in the day. So maybe that's something where our just projections and our model has this game as being higher scoring than what the books have it. Cause it's not like an 8.5 run total is, a massive line for this game. So once again, we'll see where that goes. But as of right now, I'm not massively interested in either side. But you mentioned those cheap price points for Arizona. Are those enough to make you want to get something against John Gray?
Not really. I mean, they're fine as value, like as filler, but I don't really feel strongly one way or the other. I think John Gray is my favorite part of this game.
Oh, interesting. So sell me on John Gray, which isn't that hard to do because the Diamondbacks offense is terrible.
That's most of my pitch. Against right-handed pitching this year, Arizona's active roster has a 24.9% strikeout percentage, 78 WRC plus. Gray has been fine, 24% strikeout percentage, 4.08 xFIP this year. But one thing to keep in mind too is just kind of going through John Gray's recent starts. San Francisco last time, at Washington, who we know is a difficult team to strike out, at Atlanta, San Francisco, Dodgers, Diamondbacks, Giants, Astros, Cubs, which is a good matchup, Padres. Just a really mostly difficult stretch of games for Gray. Then you also, keep in mind that give or take half of his games are in Coors Field. Getting Arizona outside of Coors is going to be one of the better spots we've seen for Gray. So I just don't really know why he's not getting more ownership at 7,700. I understand he's not a great pitcher, but I think he is pretty good. He has solid strikeout stuff. We have him with a 10% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, but only getting about 3% ownership. If that ownership holds, I like getting there. I mean, he's getting about the same ownership as Cortez, who's $1,200 more expensive. Not that Cortez is popular, but like I think rather get to Gray at the discount than Cortez. He's getting less ownership than Noah. He's getting 1/10 the ownership of Steven Matz. That's another one. Like I don't think the range of outcomes is drastically different for Gray than it is for Matz, and he's cheaper and lower owned.
Yeah, and once again, the matchup is great. And then one other thing also here with John Gray is, at least as of now, we have Arizona projected for a little bit of ownership. And it's not something crazy, but it's still, we're offering a little bit of leverage there when we have a Diamondbacks team that's projected to be overowned. And John Gray, at least in our top pitchers tool, which once again is free to look at today, only 2.8% projected ownership going to John Gray, 10.2% chance to be a top scoring pitcher. So I'd overlooked him a little bit, but yeah, I'm in on John Gray as long as these numbers currently hold. I think that's really sensible. 3 games left here to talk about, and another one here where we don't have a listed starting pitcher. That is the San Diego Padres. Their pitchers to be determined. For the San Francisco Giants, Anthony DeSclafani is on the mound. The Giants have a 2-game lead on the Dodgers with 3 games left in the regular season. So if the Giants are to win tonight and the Dodgers are to lose, that means the Giants would clinch the NL West. So still motivation for both those teams to be playing. The matchup for Anthony DeSclafani against the Padres. We've seen the Padres play some watered down lineups in recent games, which that could make this look like a little bit a better of a spot for Anthony DeSclafani on paper. As of now, the 3.1% ownership, I think it's maybe a little bit low, but I mean, now that we just brought up John Gray, like I'd rather get to John Gray at that price point, and I'm not sure that we have that much of a need to have to save salary pitching today.
Yeah, I'm with you on not really needing to save salary. I'm with you on Gray, but I think it also, like, the tournament angle applies to DeSclafani as well. Probably not going crazy deep into the game. I would assume you're getting like 80 to 85 pitches or so, but I think that's the case for most pitchers at this point. So it's not like it's a huge knock against him, especially when he's as cheap as he is. He does have good strikeout stuff, particularly against right-handed hitters. We've seen him throughout his career have success. This year, holding them to a 271 expected WOBA, 22.4% strikeout percentage. It's just another guy that I think it's not a great spot against the Padres, but it's a good park to pitch in. I just don't think his range of outcomes is drastically different than someone like Matz or Noah that are getting more ownership at a higher price point. So I don't mind using him as a low owned pitcher in tournaments. Probably not someone that I'm getting crazy amounts of, but wouldn't be surprised at all if I get more than the field.
Yeah, and JM in the YouTube chat is saying that Joe Musgrove is starting for the Padres. Once again, he's listed as the probable starter on DraftKings, but we don't have him in our data right now. He's not been confirmed by the team, and there's nothing to suggest that he's actually pitching. That's just kind of a best guess. He hasn't started since last weekend, so he could be the guy. And I think that's a reasonable enough reason to guess him. But as of right now, I'm not sold that he's going to be the starting pitcher. And let's see, what is his salary? He is at 9,200 on DK. And Joe Musgrove, I mean, no, I hope it's not him. I'm tired of dealing with him. I'd be happy to be done with Joe Musgrove this season. But if Joe Musgrove ends up being the starter, he always has a little bit of upside as a starting pitcher, but he's also really high variance. So there's no reason to stack against him. The Giants are going to be playing their full lineup today. But do you have any real kind of read here on who's starting for San Diego?
No, I don't. I haven't seen anything confirmed. I see the same thing you do, that Musgrove is people's guess, but I have no idea.
All right, 2 games left here. Clayton Kershaw on the mound for the Dodgers, Eric Lauer for the Brewers. And I think the key thing here to talk about with Clayton Kershaw is kind of like what we talked about with some other pitchers today, a la the White Sox guys and what we've seen from Lance Lynn as of late, is I just don't know how deep Clayton Kershaw is going to have to go into this game. And on top of that, it's not like he's pitched all that well as of late, but last 4 starts for Clayton Kershaw, 54 pitches, 50 pitches, 74 pitches, 73 pitches. The thing that's really concerning to me about Kershaw is it's not like he's getting ramped up. If he went from 50 pitches to 74 to say like 80 or 85 in his last start, I would feel better about it. But the fact that you pitched 74 pitches 2 starts ago and then 73 pitches last start, I just kind of have to assume he's going to be in that 75-ish range again.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. Don't like it wouldn't be surprising if you saw him get to 85 or something, just to get him, ready for the postseason. But I think there's at least, based on the fact he threw 74 and then 73 pitches, there's at least reason to think that they're going to keep him there. The one thing I would point out is last game he went 4 1/3, gave up 3 earned runs. So him going 4 1/3, and this is something that I've mentioned to Sean V like 100 times over the course of the season. When you see a pitcher that starts the next inning but then gets pulled, the plan wasn't for him to go 4 1/3 innings. Like, they were trying to get him through to the 5th. So I do think that bodes well. Like, it's just a start where he wasn't pitching that well. But say he didn't get in trouble in that 5th inning, you probably do see 80 to 85 pitches and him finish 5 innings. So if he's pitching well here, I do think there's a decent chance you get that 85, around 85 pitches and 5 innings or so.
Yeah. Is that enough for you to make you want to get to him? If he was low owned, I think he'd be reasonable. But for me, the thing that kind of scares me off is, number one, the matchup against the Brewers isn't ideal, but it kind of seems like the field is expecting an uptick in pitch count for Clayton Kershaw. We have him projected for 18.4% ownership on DK. Over on FanDuel, he's projected for not as much ownership. Once again, single pitcher site, and he's 10,400, making him the most expensive pitcher on all of FanDuel today. So is there enough ownership there that kind of makes you think that Clayton Kershaw just maybe too much ownership to get to?
I think the ownership makes sense because, again, like, I expect him to throw more than 75 pitches here, just based on the fact that he was pulled mid-inning last start. So I do think there's a pretty decent chance you're getting a little bit more from Kershaw than you had. And also, there's not a whole lot to pay up for in pitching. So the opportunity cost isn't that high either. So I don't anticipate going crazy on Kershaw here, but I also think the ownership makes sense.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm hoping this is one where we're going to get information from a beat reporter and say, because it's Clayton Kershaw, it's a big name. The Dodgers are also a team that gets way more coverage than the majority of baseball teams. So if there is any spot where we would potentially be getting a beat reporter to give out a pitch count number, it would be on this Clayton Kershaw spot. Once again, though, that remains to be seen, and we have more shows and content coming up throughout the day. The other side of the game is going to be Eric Lauer pitching for Milwaukee against the Dodgers, and the Dodgers offense is certainly potent enough to where I do not want to roster Eric Lauer. And then for the Dodgers on the other side, we're going to be seeing the full Dodgers lineup today. They're trying to push for the AL West. As slim as the chances are, only about 10% chance to win the division over on FanGraphs right now. We're only 1.2% ownership going to the Dodgers. We've seen over the last week, especially, the kind of power upside this offense has when they're playing everybody. So 1.2% ownership, in my opinion, that is too low for the Dodgers.
Agreed. Lauer's just like a middle of the road pitcher too. I don't think he's bad. About 1 home run per 9 innings, 23.5% strikeout percentage, 4.19 xFIP. Not a bad pitcher, but not a pitcher I'm shying away from taking hitters against when you're talking about the hitters being as good as the Dodgers are. He does have really weird splits this year as far as his strikeouts go. He's only struck out 17% of lefties, but he struck out almost 27% of righties, 296 expected WOBA to righties, 313 to lefties. He's given up more power to righties. But again, when you're talking about a lineup like the Dodgers, I don't care all that much about any of that, just because they are pretty much above average hitters throughout the entire lineup. So if they're not going to get ownership here, I think the Dodgers look pretty good.
All right, final game of the slate. Marco Gonzalez at home against the Los Angeles Angels. Jose Suarez on the mound for Los Angeles. And for the longest time, Marco Gonzalez had not been pitching well this year. He was somebody who I thought made sense to stay away from, and pitched much better in the second half of the year. He's also drawing a really good matchup against the Angels. I wish the 8,400 price tag was a little different. I wish the ownership was different. So I think I'm going to be underweight to the field on Marco Gonzalez, currently projected for 18.3% ownership on DK. Over on FanDuel, I don't really think there's a real need to roster him at 8,100 when he's 12.6% owned. But where do you stand on Marco Gonzalez?
I understand why he's getting the ownership here. The Angels have a 3.3 implied run total. The Mariners do still have something to play for. They're in the wild card race in the American League. So this is a spot where if Gonzalez is pitching well, you can expect him to throw a lot of pitches over his last 4 starts, 96, 99, 110, 101. On a normal slate, if this were a month ago, that wouldn't really be a huge selling point because you would have a lot of pitchers that are in the same situation. But tonight, where a lot of the guys that we're talking about were expecting or hoping that they throw like 85 pitches, Gonzalez being allowed to throw 100 plus makes him a little bit more viable. He has pitched better lately, like you said, and then the Angels have a lot of strikeouts in their lineup as well. All of that said, you still run into the same issue where Gonzalez isn't a great strikeout pitcher. You have a lot of just arm talent around him in that price range, just getting much lower ownership. So I don't have a strong take either way, I guess. Like I understand Gonzalez's ownership. I think he's a good option. If he were lower owned, I would be saying I really like Gonzalez. So that kind of just makes me think that the ownership is coming in around where it should. As is, I'll play him where I have lower owned stacks. I'll stay away from him where my stacks are higher owned.
Yeah, and I think that is real. I certainly don't have interest in the Angels offense today, but on the other side, Jose Suarez going up against the Mariners offense. Suarez, he's had some games where he's shown upside in the second half of the year, and I actually do find him a little bit appealing here. I think people are just going to kind of write him off from a standpoint of, hey, the Mariners have something to play for here. The Angels don't. But Jose Suarez at 6,200 salary, there's nobody else priced below 7,000 that I really find all that interesting on DK. So I don't know that I'm going to get to him, but if I have to roster pitcher below 7K today, Jose Suarez would be my SP2 option.
That's pretty much where I am. I don't think it's going to be necessary given all the value bats we're going to have, given the fact that, and also, you have Desclafani at 7,200, you have Gray at 7,700. Like there's pitchers in the 7K range that you can use for value if you need it that aren't getting ownership. So I kind of doubt that you need to get down to Jose Suarez, but if you do, that's where I would go. 18.9% strikeout percentage as a starter this year isn't great, but in his recent starts, 97, 96, 102, 100 pitches. It's not like the Angels had anything to play for in those games either. So I think he's fine if you need to punt pitcher for whatever reason.
Yeah, and that's also, I don't know, just to reiterate, I don't know that I'm going to. Same thing with the Cubs. We were talking about them before. It's like, hey, this team looks interesting with a 27% chance to be the top value stack on the slate. But there's no real pitchers to pay up for. There's no real spot where I think we need to save salary. Maybe if I'm making a 5-man Dodger stack, that's where Jose Suarez could come into play. But on the whole, probably somebody who I'm not going to need to get to, maybe ends up in like 5% of lineups or something. Low priority play either way. But just a couple minutes left here. Adam, any thoughts you have on this slate before we sign off for the day?
No, not really. It's one where I think that lineup building is going to be kind of weird because there's plenty of value, but then also not a ton of stuff to pay up for. I would say if you're someone that is typically concerned about minimum salary, this is a slate where I'd be less concerned about it just because you can make some really good lineups where you're leaving money on the table.
All right, that is going to do it for us today, guys. Do us a favor on the way out. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Plenty of content coming up today. We've got NFL shows, college football, and of course, baseball live before lock and deeper dive later in the day. Good luck today, guys.